Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Shlishi, the laws of forbidden relationships, chapter 3. One of the women that it's forbidden to marry by biblical law is a married woman, Eshet Ish. And the classic death penalty for an Eshet Ish is chenek, strangulation. So today in this chapter, the Rambam deals with all non-ordinary cases of married women. Women that are in questionable marriages, women that are in questionable statuses, and how that affects their status as a married woman. Okay, says the Rambam halacha aleph. Haba al eshes katan. If somebody has relations with the wife of a minor. So it's basically going to be a bunch of cases here on the screen, starting from the top left. The wife of a minor, she's married to the minor, but the marriage of a minor doesn't have that much halachic significance. Afilu hoisa yivama, shaba aleha ben tesha shanim v'yem echad. Even if she was a woman who was a yivama, which means her husband had passed away childless, and this brother-in-law was a minor, the only brother that the guy left was a minor, and they got married. When a minor marries a woman waiting in the wings for Yibum, there is more significance because there's no required marriage ceremony. So maybe he does acquire his wife fully. Says the Rambam, no. Harei ze poter. If somebody has relations with such a woman, even though she's technically married to the minor, but you're exempt because it's not the marriage isn't full. The same thing would be if somebody had relations with the wife of a deaf mute, that's over here, or the wife of a mentally disturbed individual, or the wife of a tumtum who has a questionable status. His genitalia is covered, you don't know if he's a male or a female. And also the wife of an androgynous, of a hermaphrodite who has both reproductive organs. Or if one has relations with a woman who herself is deaf mute, or herself is mentally disturbed, and she's the wife of a competent person. Or if a woman was consecrated in doubt or divorced in doubt, in other words, either you're not sure if she entered a marriage fully or she exited the marriage fully, kulan peturin. In all these cases, we don't judge them like a full married woman, and you're always exempt. Of course, if you were purposefully going ahead and defying Hashem's will, then makinais and makas mardos, the court, the rabbis, will give you rabbinic lashes. But biblically, we can't hold you liable. You don't go into the category of a fully married woman. It says that Rambam halacha beis, on the other hand, habal haktana eishes hagadol. If somebody has relations with a minor girl, who's the wife of a full adult male, im kitcha aviha, if it was her father who had brought her into the marriage, which she's fully allowed to do biblically, harei ze bechenek. So the adult male who has relations with her is liable to strangulation like a regular married woman. V'hi p'turam niklum. She's exempt from anything. She's a minor. Can't hold her accountable, but because her marriage is fully binding, the man who violates it gets punished. The Nesra al-Baila, she also becomes forbidden to her husband. Bottom line is she was adulterous. As we explained in the last set of laws, at the end of the fourth book, the laws of the suspected adulteress. The imhi basmiun, if she's a girl who can dissolve the marriage through refusal. In other words, she was not consecrated by the father. Anytime a woman is consecrated by her father, the marriage is fully binding. If the father passed away, and so her mother or her brothers married her off, such that she's in a marriage now where she can simply refuse and walk out, then having relations with such a married woman is not considered a high-level offense. The husband, the adulterer, gets rabbinic lashes. She remains permitted to her husband, even if he was a Kohen, because since she can dissolve the marriage simply through refusal, the whole marriage doesn't hold that much water. Halacha Gimel. Bas Kohen shezinsa kishihi eshes ish. Special law applies to the daughter of a Kohen who committed adultery when she was married. We saw this the other day when we were learning the mitzvahs. In that, she doesn't get the regular punishment. Bein shahaya ba'ila Kohen, bein shahaya Yisrael, whether her husband was a Kohen or her husband was a regular Jew, if she is the daughter of a Kohen, even if the husband was an illegitimate child or a nasin is from a certain nation, the Givonites, who fooled the Jewish people into thinking they were Jews and not one of the 7 nations. It's a whole long story. We're going to explore it later in this set of laws. Or any other man she's forbidden to marry by dint of biblical prohibition. The fact that she's the daughter of a Kohen and commits adultery, she has a special law to be burnt. She's killed not by strangulation, but by burning. And again, burning is not burning by the stake. Burning means you pour hot lead down her throat. Shenemar, as it says, uvas ish kohen kisechel is nois, if the daughter of a Kohen profanes her family name by committing adultery. So the verse ends off, ba'esh tisaref, she's burnt by fire, which means she has a different type of punishment. Ubayala bechenek, the adulterer though still gets the regular strangulation of committing adultery with a married woman. V'chein bas Yisrael eishes kohen, same thing if it's a regular Jewess, the wife of a Kohen, doesn't change her status. B'chena kidin kol eishes ish, she gets strangled like any other married woman were she to commit adultery. Then there's another type of married woman. She's not even fully married. This is called the nara me'urasa, the engaged, the consecrated girl. Halacha dalid habal nara me'urasa, if somebody has relations with a girl who has already been consecrated but not yet married, shnehen biskila. Both the adulterer and the girl who does adultery get stoned. However, for this law to be applicable, a lot of conditions have to be met. Ve'enan chayavin skila, they're not liable to stoning ad shetiya nara, besula, me'urasa, v'hi bevei savia. 4 conditions. She has to be a nara, which means in the first stage of puberty, the first 6 months. Virgin, never had relations before. Consecrated already, not fully married but already got a ring. And still in her father's house. You could actually see this in the verse which describes it. You have the red word, the green word, and the blue word. Nara, vesula, me'urasa. A maiden, a young girl, virgin, who is consecrated. All the conditions have to be met. Haisa bageres, if she was for that reason past majority, 6 months after entering puberty, or she had already got into the wedding canopy or into seclusion, even if there was no actual relation, so the marriage itself wasn't consummated, but the marriage ceremony was performed. Even if the father had already given her over to the agents of the husband, leaving his jurisdiction, seemingly, and she committed adultery on the way, she's no longer in her father's house, she's a regular married woman and gets strangled, but not the special law of stoning. If somebody has relations with a minor girl who is engaged in her father's house, hu biskila. Although the law doesn't apply to her because she's a minor, he, on account of having relations with a girl who's engaged, does get stoned. V'hi petura, while she is exempt. Even if she's daughter of a Kohen, who usually has a special law of burning. Here, if she fits the bill, she's a young girl and engaged, and she does adultery, biskila, she gets stoned. Halacha vav bo aleh asara, v'hi besula b'rshus aviyah, zeh achar zeh, 10 men ganged up on her and had relations with her while she was a virgin in the jurisdiction of her father, one after another. Harei harishan biskila v'kulan b'chenek. Only the first one, who violated a virgin girl, gets stoned to death. All the other ones don't fit that special category. While they did have relations with a woman who's already consecrated, they only get strangulation, not stoning. When does that apply? If they had relations in the natural way. But if each of them had relations in the unnatural way, from behind, adayin hi besula, so she's still a virgin. And therefore, v'kulan biskila, each one for violating her in that way gets the special law of stoning. Halacha zayin nara me'urasa. Shahaisa mishuchreres a girl who's engaged, but she was previously a slave and she was freed, or previously a non-Jew and she converted. Even if she had been freed or converted, less than 3 years old, so that even if they had relations in their previous status, it would have no effect on their virginity. Nevertheless, she loses the special status of nara besula me'urasa, and she's strangled if she does adultery like any other married woman. And there's somewhat of an argument as to why that is. Some say because in the context of the verses it mentions the word Yisrael, a full Jewess. So if she's a freed slave or a convert, the laws don't apply. Halacha ches din chadash yesh b'meitzi shemra. There's a novel law when it comes to the slanderer. We had a whole section of laws on this in the last book, where a husband marries a woman, lives with her as married, and then claims that he didn't find her to be a virgin. And not only that, he has witnesses who can testify that she was adulterous while she was consecrated. So this seems to be a similar case of the nara me'urasa. She's a girl who's consecrated, engaging in adulterous relationships. Nevertheless, there's a novel law if a slanderous rumor is first spread. What's the novel law? Umahu hachidush. What's the newness, the novelty? Sheim nimtza hadavar emes. That if the husband's claim comes out to be true, ubo edim shazinsa keshahaisa nara me'urasa, and there's witnesses that can say that she was adulterous when she was a girl who was engaged. Afal pisha zinsa achar sheyatza mibeis avia, even though she doesn't fit the 4th condition of being in her father's house. She committed adultery already outside of her father's house, outside meaning outside of his jurisdiction. Even if she was adulterous after already going under the marriage canopy, just before ever having relations with the husband, we stone her, and we stone her with a very specific requirement at the entrance to her father's house, to show that she's been a disgrace to her family. Aval shar nairis mu'urasais, but any other girl who is engaged, shaloi haya lahen dinei tzas shem ra, who never had a slanderous report about them, shazanu me'achar sheyatzu mibeis ha'av, were they to have committed adultery after leaving their father's jurisdiction, as we explained, they wouldn't get the stoning. They would get regular strangulation. Only here, because he issued a slanderous rumor, do we say that even if she had adulterous relationships after leaving the father's house, she still gets stoned. Halamadata, from the above discussion we learn, there are three possible deaths that can happen to a married woman. There's a classic case of an ordinary married woman who commits adultery, gets strangulation, her and the adulterer. There are some married women who get burnt, daughter of a Kohen. There is a married woman who gets stoned, specific case of a consecrated young girl, and also the married woman who has a slanderous report issued about her. Halacha, so you told me where we stone the woman who had a slanderous report, at the entrance to her father's home. This is the verse from the father's home, Petach Beit Avia, entrance to her father's house. What about a regular consecrated girl? Where do we stone a regular engaged girl, consecrated girl who was adulterous? So it depends where. If she had committed adultery actually on the premises of her father's house, even though the witnesses only came after she had already gone to her father-in-law's house and gotten married, but if the adulterous act was committed in the father's home, then, like the slandered girl, she gets stoned at the entrance to her father's house. But if the area where she had committed adultery was in the father-in-law's house, before the father had handed over jurisdiction of her, so she's still in her father's jurisdiction, but not in the actual father's house, even if the witnesses only came after she had returned to her father's house, she gets stoned not by her father's house, but at the entrance to the city. And this is in the verse over here. You take them both to the gate of that city. That's the default law of the engaged girl. The Rambam is just saying if she actually committed adultery in the home of her father, then we give her the law of the slandered girl, and we stone her at the entrance to her father's house, so that the family also has that disgrace attached to them. Halacha Yud Bo Eidim Achar Shabagra. If witnesses only came to testify about the engaged girl's adultery after she reached majority or after having had relations with her new husband, even if what they're testifying is that she was adulterous in her father's home when she was a maiden, a young girl, this is a third level now. She's not stoned in her father's house, not at the gate. She's stoned at the regular area of stoning. In the 14th book of the Rambam discusses that every city where there was a court that gave capital punishment, outside of the city there was like a 2-story building. That was where they stoned people. So she's stoned at the regular place of stoning. Halacha Yud Aleph, if the young girl who is in question right now, when we look back at her history, we see she was conceived not in a state of holiness. Her mother was a non-Jew when she was conceived, then converted during pregnancy, and she was born in holiness. She was born as a Jew. She is stoned, no matter what case it is, at the entrance to the city, because she doesn't fit into the special law which mentions Yisrael, a Jewish girl, to be stoned at the entrance to her father's house. Says the Rambam a general rule. In any case where the mitzvah is to stone the girl at the entrance to the city, if most of the city's inhabitants were idol-worshipping Gentiles, we do not do it at the entrance to the city, we do it at the entrance to the local court. Because Torah says it has to be by your gates. If most of the city's inhabitants are non-Jews, it's not your gates, it's non-Jewish gates essentially. But if the mitzvah is to stone her at her father's house, if she didn't have a father, or she had a father but he was homeless, he didn't have a house, she would be stoned at the regular city area where they would stone people. The Torah only says it has to be the entrance to her father's house, just because that's the optimum way of fulfilling the mitzvah, but not because that's an absolute requirement. Halacha Yud Beis. Before we move on to another category of questionable married women, the Rambam gives us a general rule about all forbidden relationships. Haba al erva min ha'arayes biyes harbe. If somebody has relations with a given biblical prohibited woman multiple times, multiple acts of relations, chayev kares misas beis din al kol biyah ubiyah. You're liable to excision or to capital punishment for every act of relations. Of course, the court cannot kill you more than once. But the idea is, the relations will be considered as separate, different, or many transgressions. And the ramification will be in case of inadvertence. If you were inadvertently had relations once, and then you realized what it was, and then you forgot again, and you had relations again, you bring a separate sacrifice for each act of relations. Similarly, you can have one relation which would hold you liable on multiple counts. One act, multiple counts. If you were inadvertent, maybe karban al kol shein b'shem, you'll have to bring a separate sacrifice for every count. Even if it's one act of relations, as will be explained in the 9th book of the Rambam in the laws of inadvertent transgressions. There the Rambam makes a case, it's a long halacha, a case of one relations that can hold you liable for 8 separate counts. So quite a complex case, but you could have relations once and transgress 8 sins simultaneously. If you were, of course, unpurposely acting, while we cannot punish you more than once, it can't kill you more than once, but it's considered multiple transgressions. You can have one relations and get multiple lashes. As will be explained later in this set of laws, in chapter 17, as we will see. And now the Rambam moves on to one final category of questionable married woman. This is called the Shifcha Charufa. Shifcha Charufa means literally the designated maidservant. When the Torah speaks of Shifcha Charufa, says the Rambam, Shifcha Charufa ha'amura b'Torah. The designated maidservant, which is spoken about in the Torah, is a very specific case. She's a woman who is a half slave and half free, consecrated to a Jewish servant. How do you have a half slave, half free? You have the case is she was owned by 2 partners. One of them freed her. So she's half slave and half free. Now, a regular Jewish person cannot marry such a woman. She's a slave. You cannot marry a slave. But a Jewish slave could marry such a maidservant. So if the Jewish slave consecrated such a woman, and now she commits adultery, that's the question. So here the Torah says there's a special law. Shenemar, as it says, lo yumsu ki lo yichu pasha. They do not die. It's not a regular case of married woman because she's not free. So first of all, what that means is, ha'im nishtachrer akula, chayavin aleh misas beis din. Were she to be fully free, you'd be liable to the death penalty. Shadei nases eshes ish gemura, kamesha be'arnu b'hilchos ishus, she becomes a fully married woman, as we explained in the laws of marriage, beginning of the 4th book. But while she's half slave, half free, in that questionable state, if somebody were to commit adultery with her and have relations with her, says the Rambam Malacha Yudalid, bias shivcha zu, mishuna mikol bias asuris shabatayra. Relations with this maidservant would be different than any other forbidden relationship. Shahari hi loika, because she gets lashes. Not excision, not a death penalty, none of that. Lashes. Shenemar, as it says, bikoides tia, there has to be an inquiry, which the sages interpret to mean lashes. This is over here. The green words. Bikoides tia means she gets lashes. V'hu chayev karban asham, and he has to bring only a sacrifice, a guilt offering. Shenemar, as it says, v'hevi es hashamay. There's the next verse there. He must bring his guilt offering. In the morning, before davening, we say a little paragraph with all the 5 people who bring a guilt offering. One of them is Asham Shivcha Charufa, the guilt offering for the person who engages in relations with this designated woman. That's the special law. No other punishment. She gets lashes, he gets a sacrifice. Echad shegig ve'echad mezid b'shivcha charufa mevi asham. Whether you're inadvertent or purposeful, you got relations with this designated maidservant, you bring a guilt offering. Another different law. If you have multiple relations with her, bein bezadin, bein bishgaga, purposely or inadvertently, maybe asham echad, you only bring one sacrifice. Unlike we just said with any other forbidden relationship, you're held liable on multiple counts or each one. Here, no. Aval hi chayeves malkos lakol biah, but she is. She gets separate lashes for each act. If she was purposefully acting, kishar chayav ilav, like anybody else who's liable on account of negative punishments, you do an act again and again and again, you get lashes again and again and again. Halacha tezvav hamayre b'shivcha charufa v'legam Rabbi Yossi. Another difference. If a person merely inserts his organ into the shivcha charufa without completely inserting the organ, regularly, that's considered to be full relations. Here, potter, you're exempt ad sheyigmar b'yosei till he concludes the relations. Ve'einei chayav, another law, is that you're only liable ela al hagdoila, habeula, hamezida, ubirtzaina. This maidservant must be a fully adult woman. She must previously have had relations. She must be acting purposefully, and she must be consensual. But if she was a minor, or she never had relations, or she was inadvertently acting, raped, or asleep, Potter, you're exempt. Potter. Same thing if you have relations unnaturally. You're also exempt. Even though in the regular case, doesn't matter. Here it does. By a specific case of this woman, this maidservant, Torah doesn't compare regular intercourse to unnatural intercourse. Shenemar, as it says, shichva zera, you have to have relations carnally, in a way of emitting seed, which is only true of the natural way. In other cases, of course, there's no difference. As we saw in chapter 1. Shenemar, as it says, mishkevei isha. Interesting, this is the law guiding homosexuality. And it says you should not lie with a man, mishkevei isha, the ways that you lie with a woman, which imply there's two ways. Mishkevei isha, magid lecha akosov sheshnei mishkavei ba'isha. Torah tells you there's two ways to lie with a woman. Both naturally and unnaturally are considered to be fully relations with regards to incurring punishment. But with a shivcha charufa, that's different. It says that Rambam Malacha Tazayin, Kol Makim Shamarnu B'Shivcha Shehu Pater, wherever we say by the maidservant that he is exempt, Hu Pater Min HaKarban V'Hi P'tura Min HaMalkos. Both are exempt. He's exempt from the sacrifice, she's exempt from lashes. We will give them rabbinic lashes if they were both purposefully acting and adults, but we can't hold them liable to the Torah's punishment. And the final halacha, ben tesha shanim v'yem echad, shebal shivcha charufa, if a 9-year-old boy has relations with this questionable maidservant, while she's in the state, consecrated to the other servant, he loika v'hu mevi karban. She gets lashes, and listen to this, you have a child, underage, has to bring a sacrifice. Of course, if she meets all the criteria, she's an adult, previously had relations, and doing it consensually, as we explained. A man is never liable to a sacrifice unless she's liable to lashes. It says one after another. Only if there's an inquiry, then he brings the guilt offering. But in this case, if she gets lashes, he has to bring a sacrifice. Commentaries ask why. He's only a minor. So some explain that has to do with the fact that this is not a punishment. This sacrifice is an atonement. A kid cannot get punished, but he doesn't need atonement. But that doesn't suffice, because why should a kid need atonement? We're not liable for things we do before bar mitzvah. But the Rebbe has a fascinating talk where it ties into a much bigger theme about how we look at children in halacha. And we've encountered this once before. So long as somebody, or so long as the child contributes to an adult having a fully binding act done halachically, the power of that act also carries over to the child. By dint of the fact that the woman is becoming liable, the kid's act also gets a certain importance of the Torah, and he also needs to bring a sacrifice for that reason. It's a much wider discussion, but that's the bottom line. The Raavad, who differs with the Rambam here, differs almost in every place where the Rambam attaches significance to a child's acts, because it's a general difference of opinion between them. How do we look at a child's act? Could a child's act get importance by dint of somebody else's act or not? And the Rambam holds that he can, and therefore in this case, the child has to bring a sacrifice.